This is the Big O Show. This is the Big O Show.
Welcome back. The home stretch here on Inside the Paint. And we're talking playoffs. Talking about playoffs? Playoffs. My inner Jim Mora there. Jim Mora Sr., great Saints coach. But when you're looking at these postseason matchups, Ira, and we talked about it a little bit in the crossover, and I think we can all agree that you don't want to see Brooklyn in the first. We can talk about, they're not as good as everybody seems to think they are. Vegas has them higher than the Heat. You don't. This is what it's about. You don't want to have to face Brooklyn and Milwaukee or Boston and Philadelphia. You do not want to play Brooklyn. So I think we can all agree. But among these other teams, Chicago's not going to be in the mix in all likelihood unless they lose all their remaining games and Cleveland wins all theirs. But among Cleveland, Charlotte, Atlanta, who do you not want to play? Who do you not want to play among that group? What's the one team among that group that you're kind of like, I'd rather avoid them in the first round if at all possible?
It's not a choice. And it's what you and I have been talking about for weeks, and Big O's been poo-pooing. But that's the reality, that when you play the Nets, they will have the best player on the court in Kevin Durant, best player in the Eastern Conference, and at times, arguably, the two best players on the court, because Kyrie, when he wants to score, can score. It's almost like if you gave the Heat the playoff board and said, congratulations, you're the number one seed, you get to set the playoffs. The Heat would set themselves as a number one, of course, and they would set Brooklyn as the number 7. And here's why. The number 1 plays the number 8. So if you have Brooklyn out of there, you're playing Atlanta, Charlotte, or Cleveland. I would prefer Cleveland because I think they're just glad to be there. But I think the Heat will win any of those series. But here's the next important thing. If I'm lining up the playoffs because I'm the number 1 seed, and that's the new NBA rule, thank you, Adam Silver, I'm going to put, say, Milwaukee 2, Boston 3, Philadelphia 4, Chicago 5, Toronto 6, and then the play-in teams. And here's why. Then if the Heat beat their first-round opponent, say Charlotte or Atlanta or Cleveland, any of them, they play the winner of the 4-5. In the 4-5 I just gave you, it's Chicago, Philadelphia. I'll take that. Probably Philadelphia. We've seen them. They've been very uneven since the Harden trade. And then you wait until the Eastern Conference Finals to get Boston or Milwaukee. But if you wind up in a different configuration and all of a sudden Boston or Milwaukee are in that 4-5 series, like you said, Clay, you could have Brooklyn in the first round. You could have Boston or Milwaukee in the second round, and then a Philadelphia to finally get to the NBA Finals, and it's a much tougher path. So as much as we're looking at the top of the standings, again, the Heat's magic number is 1. If they beat Atlanta on Friday at FTX Arena or Orlando on Sunday at the Amway Center, they're in their number 1. That's going to happen. It's going to happen for another reason, because Boston and Milwaukee only need to lose 1 game apiece if the Heat don't win again. And Boston and Milwaukee play each other on Thursday. Yes. So there's going to be 1 loss there anyway. So that's pretty much taken care of. It really is standings watching for the Heat. I'll give you the other example. You're talking about who I don't want to play. If it's Philadelphia and Toronto at 4-5, which it looks like it might be, we know the Raptors give the Heat fits. We know those games have been brutal and have gone down to the wire. So all of a sudden, you could have the Heat in the first round playing Brooklyn, in the second round playing Toronto or Philadelphia, and that's the tougher path also. I think the greater standings watching for the Heat right now is not the Heat at the top, but where everything else falls into place. I would love to see Toronto fall back to 6th. I would love to see Chicago and Philadelphia in the 4-5. Better matchup for the Heat, as good as Joel Embiid has been on his MVP type level. But I'm just telling you, Clay, right now. Matter of fact, I'm going to play the game with you, Clay, right now, okay? I want you to give me a number. Big O, if you're there, you want to pop in or whatever, feel free. If not, I understand also. The Heat play the Charlotte Hornets in the first round. Heat in how many games, Clay?
5.
Okay. I don't disagree. Big O, you there? You want to pop in? Heat versus Hornets.
Sweep.
Sweep. 4-0. Okay.
Yeah, they swept them this year. They
swept them during the regular season. Charlotte doesn't play defense. Usually you have to play defense to win the playoffs. Heat versus Cleveland Cavaliers. Clay?
5.
Big O?
Well, Yeah, I'll give them one game. I'll give them one game.
I go 5. I say
Show me a
gentlemen
little
sweep.
moxie this year. I'll give them one
Gentlemen
game.
sweep because they might have the moment when their bigs are all big and Kevin Love is hitting threes and Markkanen is hitting threes. I agree with that. Heat versus Trae Young and the Atlanta Hawks.
One game, 5, I say too.
Clay?
Yeah, I'd say 5, potentially 6 if you have a couple of Trae Young games.
Yes, yes.
Team
My
can play
answer to that.
defense. That's what's changed. This
They
team.
don't,
that's
and
true.
John Collins has been out also, and John Collins had been a Heat killer, and he's been injured. I'm going to say 6 because Trae Young has shown, even in last year's playoffs, he could win a few games for you. He's that dynamic.
We have Caleb Martin, dude.
Yes, we have a Trae Young stopper.
The Trae Young shut
So now
down.
now in Atlanta's locker room, there's going to be a thing. Heat host Orlando Alzugaray says he'd have Trae stopper. It'll be on you, Big O.
Down.
Okay.
Lock down. Caleb.
Let's get to the moment of truth right now. Miami Heat, Brooklyn Nets, first round. Kyrie eligible to play in all 7 games. No, you probably want a few seconds to think here, but this is radio. This is online. We stream right away. Clay Ferraro, Heat versus Brooklyn Nets.
I'm going 6, and I think it's because in the playoffs, how often do you have blowouts really in the playoffs when you have two teams? And I'm not saying that Brooklyn is as a team even with the Heat at this point, but when you have teams that are close enough, these games come down to a few possessions late in the ball game. And to your point, Kevin Durant is going to be the best player on the floor. I think we can all agree. So if you're going possession for possession and Kevin Durant gets the ball in his hands, I would have concern that Kevin Durant could win 2 games by himself in a possession.
Fair enough. And
Big
O, where would you go with that?
I'm repeat everything Clay just said. It's 6. I'm going to give the Nets respect because Kevin Durant's an absolute badass.
Yeah,
but they don't have enough to stop. I think the Heat when it's all said and done. So I think they'll wear them out in 6.
See, I think it could be 7, and that's where I'm glad the Heat will have the home game at FTX Arena. The 3-point shooting we saw last night at home, they're a different team.
Yeah.
I just think that Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving have enough championship-level moxie to push that thing to the distance. And I also think it'd be one of those game 7s where, oh my God, Kyrie just put him ahead by 2 with 11 seconds to go before Kyle Lowry hits a 3 to put it away. I'm telling you guys, that will be excruciating. That will be grueling because you do not go into a game and say, they're just the Hornets, they're just the Cavaliers, they're just the no defense Atlanta Hawks. That'll be the worst possibility. And I would not put it out of the realm that we're doing our Slomin's Inside the Paint, Slomin's Home Security Inside the Paint show, wrapping up the Heat season after that series. That, to me, is the nightmare scenario because those 2 guys are championship-level winners. And I'm telling you, that's why, Big O, next week in our 2 accurate Pembroke Pines reports on our Slomin's Home Security Inside the Paint on Wednesday, we're going to be tracking those play-in games and have decided teams that Heat Nation will be rooting for because you just don't want any part of the stinking Nets.
Yeah, can I just say one thing, though? And this is everything that you're saying is logically correct. This team is not logical. There's something about this team, and I don't know what it is, but they just, for whatever reason, when their backs are against the wall or when they're being whatever, you seem to see the best in this team. Now, I completely agree with you because I think when you look at, hey, you don't want to have to play 3 of the best teams back to back to back if you don't have to because of getting extended, right? It's not that you don't think that you're going to win that series. It's that, okay, it's grueling. It's an extra game means somebody might get hurt. You go back to last year in the playoffs. How much of a role did injuries play in that Brooklyn-Milwaukee series? I mean, that it's getting extended can be a problem. But with all that said, I don't know, man. This team, like every time you think they're going to zig, they zag. We kept looking at the schedule saying, oh, well, they have this stretch coming up where they're going to play the Knicks at home. Hey, they're going on the road to play Philadelphia with no Joel Embiid, no James Harden. They're weird, and they're weird in a great way where when their backs are against the wall. So I could see them.
Hey, I'll spin it this way. Let me spin it this way to you guys. If this is the team that suffers the injury to Goran and to Bam,
right?
Isn't it better suited to recover right now?
Yeah.
You know, not that you want to recover from Bam because Bam is Bam, and I get that. But if you lose Goran, it's like, in other words, this year, if something happens to somebody in the starting lineup, there is depth now. There is a second and sometimes even a third person you can go to at certain positions on this bench, which is the freakish thing that you're talking about now, Clay, that This team has adjusted
Oh,
to
you're
all the craziness
you're
all
damn right,
year
because
they're deep.
yes, remember who filled in? Remember who filled in for Bam? Thanks, by the way, Big O. Remember who filled in for Bam? Myers Leonard filled in for Bam.
That's
So
right.
that
That's
tells
right.
you where they were on that team. So, and again, and Clay, the other point is when we're playing our game of Heat in the first round, you've seen what Nets Bucks looks like in last year's playoff series.
That's right.
Grueling,
That's right.
overtime to the wire. You saw it just recently when the Bucks played the Nets in that national television game, how it went to the wire and it was grueling and exhausting. How much fun would it be to play Cleveland or Charlotte in the first round, be done after 5 games, and sitting there and eating your popcorn while the Bucks and the Nets go at it in the 2-7? So these seedings matter. The seedings will affect the championship odds as much as the quality of the team also. Because like we said, in the East playoff pool, you have teams like Chicago and like Cleveland and like Charlotte just glad to be there. And you have teams hell-bent. Daryl Morey's entire future of what he planned for the 76ers is banked on the James Harden trade and what they did this year. It's go time. The Nets and trading away Harden and fighting all the vaccine requirements for Kyrie and getting him back. It's go time for Brooklyn right now. You have some teams, Milwaukee. Can they justify what they did last year? Can they back it up? It's go time for them. So I think there's 2 different levels of playoff teams in the East. There's the glad to be there and you want to play them. And it's the desperate to win and you don't want to play them. The seedings are going to go a long way to determining the path of least resistance in this year's playoffs.
And to be clear, I want to say this one more time. It's not that you are fearing any team. It is, as far as losing in the first round or whatever, it's simply playing the probabilities. And you don't want to have to extend yourself any further than you have to. And that's why you want to get that 1 seed typically, because you're typically playing a lesser team. Seeing the way that this is going to shake out, and again, you could play the standings game all you want, but if you look at where Brooklyn is right now, and we brought this up in the first segment, Brooklyn's in the 8th spot, and that's by virtue of a tiebreaker with Atlanta. If you're able to beat Atlanta on Friday night, then you're getting yourself into a situation where, and this is the position you kind of want to be, I would think, if you're the Heat. Not only are you the 1 seed, but you're pushing Brooklyn by virtue of beating Atlanta into that 7-8 game. And if they end up playing a Cleveland, for example, they're going to Cleveland, and we don't know if Jared Allen's going to play. He might be able, but you're talking about a much more winnable game for Brooklyn, which would immediately put them as the 7, and then you would be the 1. So if you're not up on how this all works, it's bottom line, it's important the Heat go out there and they win on Friday night.
Yeah, it's
an
important game for the Heat. And the other part of it is some people I've heard say this, well, maybe Brooklyn will lose to Cleveland because they'd rather play the Heat because Milwaukee's a tough series. You can't take that chance for this reason. The Nets will play the Cavaliers if the Nets wind up at 7 for the right to, wind up at number 8 for the right to be number 7. If they lose that 7-8 game, they're 1 game from elimination against Charlotte or Atlanta where there's no playoffs. You can't take a risk that if you play Cleveland and go, okay, we're up by 3 with 3 minutes to go, but we'd rather play the Heat. Go ahead, Darius Garland, get a few layups. We'll just win at home tomorrow. You can't do that because if Kyrie Irving twists his ankle in the first quarter of a game against the winner of 9 or 10, your entire season is crap canned and you're out of there. So yeah, if the Nets can't take care of business in a 7-8 game against Cleveland, then maybe you do rethink and you go, they're not who you thought they are. So if they get into 7-8, that's the best of all worlds if the Heat are number 1. And you're right. If you beat Atlanta, you're pushing them down a peg and you're making it a lot easier for the Nets to win out. And they're going to play Cleveland on Saturday and maybe even the Nets to win out and be home in the 7-8 game.
You don't want to get extended. And that's not just Miami, that's Brooklyn. And again, you go back to last year in the playoffs, that Brooklyn-Milwaukee series, who knows what happens if James Harden isn't fighting the hamstring, if Kyrie Irving doesn't get hurt. By getting extended, you put yourself at risk for injuries. You put yourself at risk for getting exposed on film 1 extra game. Yes. There is no situation where you want to get extended. So that's why if you're the Heat,
and you're going to be playing your playoff opener 48 hours later as opposed to 96 hours later. You want to be done on Tuesday and Wednesday when you start on Saturday or Sunday. You don't want to be done on Thursday or Friday when you start on Saturday or Sunday. That alone, you push your players through 2 play-in games, desperation games, and then you have to come back and start on the road a best-of-7 series. we're going to see pretty soon who the Brooklyn Nets are and if they are who they think they are.
Real quickly, we got like 20 seconds, Ira. Anything new on Eric Spoelstra? Anything on PJ Tucker's calf strain?
The 5-day quarantine for Eric Spoelstra isolation will go through Friday's game unless he produces 2 negative tests. If he was at the end of his coronavirus, there's a chance he can be back Friday. Probably no reason to rush regardless. PJ Tucker, because of that strain, will be evaluated today. They will practice tomorrow. I'd assume they give him the time off. You know, we've been talking about getting him the time off anyway. You can work around him, especially if Markieff Morris is back from his hip flexor strain, or else you are a little shorthanded at power forward. The Heat aren't going to push anyone at this point, whether it's the coach, whether it's the player. It's all about being right for the playoffs. That's why Kyle Lowry got last night off.
Thanks as always, guys. The Big O Show rolls on next. Thanks as always right here on Inside the Paint.
This is the Big O Show. This is the Big O Show.